Kotaku, of course, is an absolute joke of an outlet. It's shocking that they've survived this long, but they were just recently purchased, and I'm sure that means their new owners are going to force them to push more propaganda, and now they're attacking Final Fantasy, saying Final Fantasy doesn't need turn-based back, it needs better stories, as if Final Fantasy doesn't already have them. I have a few different things to show off, but before I get into the topic, if you enjoy the content I create, check out the links in the description, join the community in my live streams, and consider supporting through Patreon or YouTube memberships. Now, I say it a lot, I absolutely loved Final Fantasy 16, and I know that can be kind of a hot take. I'm not saying it's the best Final Fantasy story that's ever told. I didn't necessarily mind the direction that they went in with this gritty, dark, mature, almost like Game of Thrones-esque feel. I didn't mind it. I thought it was entertaining. I thought it was enjoyable. At the same time, I wouldn't mind them going back in direction and going back to the days of like Final Fantasy 7, for example. Though, to say that it was straight up bad is absolutely mind-blowing, because that's just not the case. Even if you don't generally like the story, I feel that people can still appreciate it to some extent, but of course Kotaku needs those rage clicks. Their new owners must be already demanding they pump out more articles and get more clicks, and I can't say I feel that bad for these activists who, let's be fair, are probably just using AI at this point and are just editing it themselves to make sure that there's not any, like, major errors, but they've put out this hit piece on Final Fantasy that's getting absolutely wrecked right now. So it says, there's been an undercurrent of opinion ever since Clair Obscur Expedition 33 took audiences by surprise earlier this year that the approach taken by the turn-based fantasy RPG is the cure for everything that ails Final Fantasy. It delivers an old-school take on the genre that's much less flawed than both Final Fantasy 16 and Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth, garnering rave reviews, gaudy buzz, and impressive sales for a first-time studio. Final Fantasy fans have been jealous. I think that the reason why we Final Fantasy fans have been a bit jealous is just because Square Enix abandoned what made them special in the first place, and if they hadn't, maybe this year we would have gotten a Clair Obscur versus Final Fantasy for GOTY, right? They would have actually have been listening to their fans, so we would be getting potentially a very good, high-quality, turn-based Final Fantasy experience that could rival Clair Obscur. Now, I absolutely loved Clair Obscur, and maybe that is in part because I used to be such a mega Final Fantasy fan. Regardless, though, it is a phenomenal game, and I don't like that they're being compared, but at the same time, if it's going to make Square Enix wake up to the fact that they need to reverse course, I'm fine with that. Do I think that all Final Fantasy games going forward need to do a complete 180? I'm not necessarily saying that. I would love if they made another game like 16, but it was a spin-off. Imagine if Final Fantasy 16 was slightly smaller in budget, a much tighter experience, and it didn't have so much downtime throughout the game and so much exploration, and then this was a spin-off. It would have done insane numbers for them, especially if it was priced at $50 like Clair Obscur. But regardless, they talk quite a lot about the battle systems and game designs, things like that, but what really infuriates me, and of course a lot of other people here, is the fact that they are hating on the storytelling that we've been getting. Rebirth, though, is a world-class game in so many ways, from the cinematic presentation to the maximalist open-world design, but it bungles many of the original source material's most important moments without providing interesting new interpretations, tensions, or epiphanies in return. They talk about how the Gold Saucer section is a perfect encapsulation, and they feel that Barrett's backstory was bungled quite a bit, which I don't necessarily disagree with. I do feel that Final Fantasy VII Rebirth missed the mark in terms of a little bit of the storytelling, but I do think that overall it was still done pretty well. My major issue is them attacking just kind of Final Fantasy in general, and it's almost like they're presenting this as if the franchise has not had great storytelling in the past, when, of course, it has. Character-driven narratives, political intrigue, philosophical themes, all integral parts of what make Final Fantasy extremely special in the first place. It's got layered, non-linear storytelling, amazing lore and world-building, characters that evolve through the story. I mean, Just going through a couple of Final Fantasy games here, Terra begins with no sense of identity or purpose and slowly regains her humanity, becoming a symbol for hope. Sephiroth is a tragic figure shaped by betrayal and loss of identity. They don't bring up Sephiroth here, and the amazing representation, I guess we'll say, of him in Final Fantasy Rebirth. Of course, Aerith's death is one of the most memorable and emotionally impactful scenes, and I would say just a gaming history, right? I feel like if you're a gamer, you know what happens and how heartbreaking it is. And then, of course, you have characters in games like Final Fantasy 16 with Clive, which we're going to get into in a second here, who sacrifice themselves for the greater good. And I could go on all day about how Final Fantasy storytelling is so amazing, but even with Final Fantasy 7 specifically, they're completely missing what Rebirth actually does right. And I feel that that is such a disservice. But of course, you see in just 1 second here why they're really attacking games like 16. 16 faltered even more frequently. For every great character moment between Clive, Joshua, and Cid, there was something in the larger narrative about geopolitical rivalries and enslaved magic users that was either straight up dumb or borderline offensive. This right here is why they wanted to write this piece, and they just could not help themselves. They're saying that they want Final Fantasy to go in a new direction going forward, and the problems that it has all boils down to Final Fantasy not pushing the narratives that they personally agree with. It's not really about good storytelling. It's about telling stories where the narrative they want to hear about is promoted and explored in the way that they find acceptable. And if you don't include those narratives in such a way, you're telling a bad story. They're literally outing themselves, saying that they want storytelling on their terms. And this infuriates me so freaking much because Final Fantasy 16, while yes, it did falter in some ways, it did so amazing in so many ways. It has bold, mature storytelling, and it doesn't shy away from very intense or difficult themes like oppression, war, the cost of power. That is a really great element that they represented fantastically in this game. It creates a world that feels lived in and politically complex, where the fate of nations are tied to personal struggles. It is a darker take on fantasy, clearly inspired by games like, or stories like Game of Thrones, and it makes every major plot development feel earned and, again, impactful. I think that's the best word that I could possibly use here. The stakes are high, but the story always feels grounded in the human experiences of these characters. Clive, I love him so much, and by the way, Ben started such a fantastic job voicing him, but he is one of the, in my opinion, strongest protagonists in the series, not because he's like the most powerful, but because of how much he actually grows. And I feel like in some Final Fantasy games, the characters don't necessarily grow as much as I'd like them to, but similar to Terra, for example, or even Titus, they grow so much. His journey from a traumatized soldier to someone who tries to reshape the world is filled with pain and loyalty, and he's got so much like self-reflection that he does. And I just think that they, of course, really only wrote this article to push the narrative that, well, Final Fantasy needs to go in a new direction story-wise because they are personally bothered. I mean, again, they say the larger narrative about geopolitical rivalries and enslaved magic users that was either straight up dumb or borderline offensive, so that is why they don't like this game. It never quite grapples with the stakes of its grim world building before eventually ditching it all for some old school Final Fantasy guy in the sky Deus Ex Machina shit that undermines everything players had previously become so emotionally invested in. Yeah, I don't think that they actually played this game, judging by this type of statement. It is so freaking ridiculous. I mean, even if there's Final Fantasy stories that you personally might not like, I think that we can all agree that Kotaku has, of course, just completely outed themselves here. It's like they're saying it's not good unless it's written the way that they like and that they want, and that is really why they're getting totally wrecked on social media right now. Kotaku doesn't need activists posing as journalists. They need gamers who care about video games. Bad stories. It uses Final Fantasy 16, one of the best stories in the franchise in a long time. You can't be serious. No wonder you guys are falling apart. Final Fantasy doesn't need your takes on the game. I've seen enough of your negative posts from the past. Core fans of the franchise dating back to the 80s would disagree. Lots of us stopped playing because it went action RPG. And while I, of course, was not playing the Final Fantasy games when they were originally releasing, because I'm only 26, I have played all of them up until this point, right? And I absolutely love those original experiences. And even as someone who wasn't playing them at the time and who has over the years, slowly played through the franchise, and now, of course, I've played all these games, I can completely understand why there would be people who would be so turned off by the modern Final Fantasy games. And a big reason is because they went action RPG. I don't think that the storytelling has gone massively downhill. Yeah, there have been some mediocre games in there story wise, but generally I feel like what has infuriated people so much is them going action RPG. It's like this Kotaku activist doesn't know that. No, it does also need to be more turn-based focused. That's what made the series successful in the first place. E33 shows you how it's done. That's a very, very bad take. Name a single Final Fantasy that has a bad story. I'll wait. 16 had, like always, an amazing OST and story. It did have other flaws, but it's still peak. Kotaku wrong again. By changing the main component of games combat over and over, all they end up doing is alienating the old fan base, although I guess they want to reach a different audience. So, yeah, I mean, Kotaku is getting wrecked, rightfully so. I think this is such a bad take on their part, but really, at the end of the day, it's all just about propaganda. They want games promoting the propaganda they personally support, and when it doesn't, they're going to write hit piece after hit piece. When Final Fantasy 16 originally came out, we saw the Access media flipping out over it having oppression and themes like slavery. They were very bothered by that, saying they shouldn't go in this direction, and the producers basically laughed them off, which was really good. But we really see it's not just about allowing developers to tell a story that they want to tell. It's about these activists demanding that these developers tell the stories that the activists want to consume. But that's all that I really had to discuss in this video. Let everyone know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this, give it a like, and if you didn't, give it a dislike. I appreciate your support either way, but I'll talk to you all again in the next video really soon.